Thank you, Chairman Pallone, for yielding. I would like to briefly recognize an important witness here today, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha from the great state of Michigan, who has done some truly amazing work to help bring critical attention to the dangerous levels of lead in Flint, Michigan's drinking water. And she's become a national champion. Dr. Mona, as the kids call her, thank you for being here. We're all grateful to you for all the work that you've done during the Flint water crisis and all the good that you continue to do as a pediatrician, professor, and public health advocate. There is much that the committee can learn from her today, and it's an honor to have you here. This is actually a very true story. I met Dr. Mona early on, like before any of you had heard about Flint water, and it was the first sick child that I met. And you all can picture me doing this. I was going to take the child in my arms, put him in the car, and take him to the best hospital I could in the country. And she said, okay, Debbie, take a deep breath. It's systematic. There are a lot more kids like this. And she's taught me much ever since that first day I met her. Welcome, and I welcome all the witnesses for being here today. I yield back. Thank you, Chairman Tonko. And I'm sorry to all the panel. There are two hearings that are equally important, especially for Michigan, because it's autonomous vehicles downstairs. But we've all been bouncing up and down because we care deeply about both issues. But I thank the chairman for holding this hearing. And as you've heard all morning, and as you know, this really matters in Michigan. And I would reinforce again, it's on each one of us here in Congress and a government to ensure that no city in America ever experiences what Flint experienced again. We've witnessed it. I've seen the children. I'm following the children. It matters on the adults too, but as I talked about earlier when I introduced Dr. Mona, I'll never forget those kids when I first, and the desperation of those parents. And it's really clear that government at all levels failed the people of Flint. Now we've got a moral obligation to fix it. And I have felt that from the very day that I first went to Flint, and the ACLU, before it ever became public, started talking to me about what happened. And that's why a strong, proactive, and clear federal lead and copper rule is needed for the long term to protect Americans all across the country. I'm going to address my first set of questions to Dr. Mona. I call her Dr. Mona because the kids call her Dr. Mona. And I should maybe be more respectful, but I trust kids more than I trust adults some days. Sorry. But in your testimony, you stated that EPA's proposed revisions to the lead and copper rule are minimalistic and insufficient, which I agree with. Given your expertise and your experience in Michigan, I want to direct a series of questions to you. First, can you describe for the committee why there is no safe level of lead?
Yeah, we talked about that briefly before. It is a neurotoxin. It impacts cognition and development and behavior and has life-altering, multi-generational, multi-system consequences. Very clear science, which we've known for hundreds of years, back when the Romans used lead, now tells us that there is no safe level.
So having said that, and we've talked a little about it, and we keep dancing it, but we got to stay on it. What do we do to protect our most vulnerable, which is our children, and pregnant women?
Right.
What is the most direct thing we do?
That is a great question, and that is how this rule really should be focused on, and that should be that focus on primary prevention, doing everything we can to not expose children. Not only does it make health sense and development sense, we also know it makes economic sense.
So what makes lead in drinking water different than, say, lead from a lead pencil or from paint?
Yeah, that is a great question, and that's something that I had to learn as a pediatrician, despite caring for hundreds of children with lead poisoning, both in Flint and in Detroit prior. Lead is different. Lead in water is different than other traditional sources of lead. Lead paint and lead dust. Kids are highest risk of exposure to those household sources when they are crawling and walking. Usually, when they're toddlers, they walk around, they crawl, they find a paint chip, they put in their mouth, and paint chips are actually sweet, and so they continue to eat them. Lead in water impacts a different age group. It impacts the unborn, has well-known maternal fetal impacts, including miscarriage, fetal death, prematurity, small birth weight, and it most impacts babies on formula. We have so many babies in Flint who are formula fed. We have low breastfeeding rates, and they were using this lead-tainted water to mix their formula, which is a powder. So the age group of exposure is different than the other sources of lead. And also, unlike the other sources, lead in water is in a vehicle meant for us to ingest. Like, we're not meant to eat dust and paint. Kids do it, but we are meant to drink water. It is a medical and public health necessity for us to consume water. And when lead is in it, we can't see it, we can't taste it, and we don't know what's in there.
So now let's take it to another step. So what's the difference between lead exposure in schools and in daycare versus exposure in homes? And what do we need to make sure the kids are getting safe drinking water in schools?
Sure, that's a great question. So lead in schools and childcare facilities are a little different than lead in homes. Usually there's not lead service lines to these bigger buildings. The lead is coming from fixtures and faucets. Lead in schools usually is increased because there's long periods of water non-use, for example, weekends, overnight, breaks, which concentrate the exposure of lead. So that first kid that comes in on a Monday morning, turns on the drinking faucet, they're going to get a gush of lead in their water. So that's what makes it a little different. And we have poorly invested in the infrastructure of our schools. And this is another reminder of why we need more capital investment in our schools to get them caught up.
Thank you. I yield back, but I will have some questions for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of you.